Today I interviewed Steve Harper. He writes for the CW show STARGIRL, and he also wrote for God Friended Me, Covert Affairs, American Crime. His plays are produced all around the country. He's also an amazing actor, producer, and coach, and I think you're going to love this interview. So let me know what you think. Enjoy.
Okay, so yeah, how did you come to writing and playwriting? Is it something that you always knew that you wanted to do?
No. I think, when I started in the industry, I was determined to be an actor, and so that was like 100% of the thing. And we were a big TV family, so we watched a lot of television, and I just felt like I was also like the very quiet, introverted kid in my family, and everybody else would be sort of like have their own zaniness. I don't know if they would recognize themselves in that comment, but I was sort of like the quiet kid. And I kind of think I looked at television and thought, oh, that's the way to express myself and be noticed and, sort of make an impact on the world. So I was really determined to do that. And the acting thing became super challenging in a number of ways that like I could talk about for hours and hours and hours. But essentially, I got to the point where I wanted to just be in one place. Like, how can I just be at home, come home at night, rather than after graduate school, I did a lot of regional theater, and I was traveling around the country and taking my box with me and all this stuff. And I just was like, I would rather be home. And, and so I thought, well, how can I do that? And I thought, well, writing, if I could write my own stuff. Now, I also wasn't super happy it was very challenging as a Black actor to sort of be I sort of felt like I was either the sidekick or I was some sort of weird stereotype, like lots of military parts and lots of, I don't know, just stuff that I was sort of like, do I really want to do this? And anyway, so bottom line is I thought, let me write my own stuff and create different images. And I started doing that, and I started getting readings of some of my work at theaters that I'd worked at. And that felt successful already. Like I was like, okay, well, this is good. So it really started there and just kept going.
Yeah, and so what brought you out to LA? I recall you saying that you came out quite a bit for visits for a while before making the move.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Well, I was, yeah, it's so interesting. I was, ultimately, I felt like my parents are teachers, so I always feel like there was always an educational component to the stuff I was doing. Like it was sort of drilled into my head that you had to learn, in good schools before you could do anything. So I had this whole thing that's, sort of about that. But when I was trying to transition to being a writer, it's very interesting because, when I was an actor and I was living in New York, I'm from New York, and I moved to Baltimore, all the theaters in Baltimore were hiring, and in DC were hiring people out of New York. And I was like, well, I'm from New York, And then it was like, oh, maybe I need to go to graduate school to sort of get this sheen, So I had the same thought as a playwright. And I met somebody who knew somebody. I just kept asking people about it. And I met somebody who was who was in charge of the directing program at Juilliard. And I met with him and talked about, should I apply to this playwriting program thing? And I was also trying to apply to new dramatists, and which I'd applied for before. And anyway, he was very encouraging, and I applied and I got in. I never got into new dramatists, but it was really interesting because they took at the time 4 people per class, and of the people in my class, I wasn't really the favorite, which was sort of like, oh, it's only 4 people, and I didn't really, and B, I was about to be the only person graduating from my class without an agent, and I had this huge panic about it. And I went to the literary manager, and we ended up doing this writing campaign to agents, and I think we sent out 10 letters, and I only had like 2 meetings, and then one person who was most interesting to me didn't sign me for a year, And then a year later, I was like, here's another play. And then they brought me in, and, and on the day they signed me, they were kind of like, are you interested in television? And I've always been interested in television because I was a TV kid. And from that point on, I would come out to LA every year for like 5 years. I'd come out for a week at my own expense, and I would stay in a hotel, and I would take like 15 meetings each of those weeks, which was crazy. It's 3 meetings a day. I'm driving around LA. I'm renting a car, blah, blah. And nothing ever happened. Like there was no.
And you had sample, like you had specs and pilots, or?
I had plays, but I also had, at one point in when I lived in Baltimore, Warner Brothers had started doing this pilot program. I don't know if they're still doing it anymore, but they had this kind of script methodology that they would give to like English teachers at a university. This was the idea anyway, at a university, and those people would then, sort of disseminate that to their students. And Morgan State, which is a HBCU in Baltimore, got this curriculum. And I had, before I hosted a kid show in Baltimore, which is a whole nother story, I had worked at the Maryland Film Commission, and the film commissioners came to me and they were like, this thing is happening. You should probably, if you're interested in this whole world, you should take these classes. So I learned all the stuff about all this sort of, Warner Brothers methodology of how to write a script. And I knew that, and then just sort of tucked it away and didn't do anything with it. So I both had some specs, but also plays. And on the basis of those, I would take all these meetings, and, and that went on and on and on. Nothing ever happened. I've had some very nice meetings. I was sort of bringing my kid show personality to these meetings, and it just never resulted in a job.
And the years that you came out, were you meeting with the same people every year?
No,
or
these were
always
all completely different people.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, oh, now, it's like, the thing about it is that my agent at the time was able to twist people's arms into like, this guy's from New York and you like his writing and he's only going to be here for, 5 days, and that is kind of the way things work out here in terms of like, they created hype and the hype benefited me.
Yeah.
Consequently, when I moved out here and was here full time, the first year I was here was like, in my mind, like a disaster. Like I had an agent and a manager at that point, but no meetings. That whole year, there was nothing. It was just
so you moved out here a little bit of a leap of faith.
Yes. Yeah. I kept saying that I was interested in it. My partner at the time was not interested. And then there was a whole bunch of stuff that happened. There was death in my family and just a lot of soul searching and like, life is short and what am I doing? And I need to, like, if I'm going to do this thing, then maybe I just need to, because one of my excuses, at first it was he didn't want to move, but then the second was, I don't want to start over. I'm whatever X age and, move over to LA and what's that about? And starting at the bottom, blah, blah, blah. But then, then it was kind of like in the wake of this death was sort of like, oh, and it was my late partner who died. And it was sort of like, oh, I'm already starting over. Like the starting over has begun. Like it might as well be on the other side of the country because I'm already starting over. So what am I sitting here doing? Like, why am I not, so I moved and it was a big leap, but it was sort of like turmoil is already happening. Let's see.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are probably doing that right now too, just because of the turmoil that's happening.
Yes.
So you were here for a year, nothing happened. And
I had one meeting that year, which was with somebody I'd already met, actually.
What were you doing for your day job?
Well, I think there were two things. Number one, I'd been left a little bit of money, so I didn't need a day job, but I was teaching. I'd been teaching computer skills for 10 years in New York for a live corporate events company, and I also did it privately. And and my computer teaching was more like the way there's the difference between a mechanic and a driving instructor. Like I was more the driving instructor, so I would show people how to use Word and Excel and stuff like that. It wasn't like I didn't repair anything, but it was cool. There are a lot of people obviously who don't know. Maybe fewer and fewer these days, but 10 years of my life. It was pretty cool. So I was doing some of that.
And then what was the turning point?
I was also auditioning for stuff commercially as an actor. The turning point was I was working on this pilot and getting really horrible notes from my manager. They just didn't get it. And I was just like, it was really frustrating. We kept going around. And the turning point was they said something like, we think you ought to apply to these diversity programs. And I was kind of like, screw you. Like, I didn't move across the country to go to get some internship. Like, what's happening? And I was all high and mighty. And then a couple of days later, I was sort of like, oh, I'm just sitting here. Like, I'm just sitting here doing nothing. Like, why do I have this big attitude about what I will and will not do? And so I was like, okay. So I applied to the programs, and most of them I had applied for before and not gotten in. Like, I think I've applied to Warner Brothers 3 times, and I applied to ABC a couple of times. But I applied to a bunch, and CBS was the one I hadn't applied to before, and I got in. And that was really the turning point, because I learned, I coach writers, and I sort of teach and coach a lot about the stuff we learn to do. And like that program, which is brilliantly run by Carol Kirshner, who's amazing, and has an amazing book called The Hollywood Game Plan, just FYI. But she is...
this one?
Yes, that's the one. I have it on my shelf too.
Right here. On your one.
That's right. Exactly where Carol would be happy to know that it is.
Very nice. I have talked to her.
Say again.
She's very nice. I've talked to her. You hooked me up with her, I think. Yeah.
She's very sweet. Anyway, so the whole class, you spend, when I was there, we spent time working on specs. Now they do original stuff, but you spend some time working with 2 executives on a piece on, I wrote A Good Wife with executives who knew The Good Wife. So that was amazing. And then when you get into the classes are all networking. Like, you have to learn, she teaches you have to know what your, personal A story is, and a B, C, and D story for different genres. And you introduce yourself every week to your colleagues, to a guest. And then the guest would come in and talk for 10 or 15 minutes. And then she would, one by one, you would do a mock showrunner interview with the guests. And then the guest would critique you. She'd stop after 10 minutes and say, how did he do? And the person would be like, well, he shouldn't have worn that shirt. And that joke was really off color. He clearly didn't read my material. He made me a little nervous when he started looking around. All this stuff that nobody ever tells you in interviews. And that made a huge difference. And I just started to, in my mind, kind of sketch out, what are these meetings? What are people looking for? I decided there were 3 kinds of meetings. It's the whole philosophy that I have now. And that made a huge difference. And so I already had an agent and a manager. They didn't know what to do with me when I couldn't get meetings. But now that I was somehow shiny and new in this program, they started sending me out. And I started hearing, within 6 months after the program, or both during and after the program, I would hear it was between you and 4 other people. It was between you and 3 other people. It was between you and 2 other people. And suddenly it started to get traction. And that made a huge difference. And then I got my first job on Covert Affairs, where I was for 2 seasons, and just learned a ton about the writer's room and how it works. And yeah, it made a huge difference.
Yeah, so I'm sure that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
What would your advice be to writers thinking about moving out to LA, playwrights that are in New York, or just other writers?
I think, one of the things that I did as a writer and also as an actor was I kept waiting for my reps to tell me to go. It's just waiting for some authority person to be like, now's the time, young man, and that never happened. So I just feel number one, I feel you got to follow your instinct. When you feel you're ready to do it, to roll the dice, do it. I think it's important to have some money saved, money in the bank, money to live on. It's also important to kind of have some sense of how you will make a living out here is a good idea. Maybe you've been a legal assistant and there are law firms and you can get that kind of work, or maybe, I don't know what. But I support that for sure. And I think the thing, to me, that one of the horror stories that I've heard about LA, which I think I understand, like on some level are true, are really about isolation. Like LA is, I mean, the thing about New York is I would always run into people, right? Even if they're strangers. Like I get on the subway, I'm with people. I'm on the street, I'm with people. And people are everywhere in New York. And there's a sense, even if you don't know all the people you're connected to, that the people are around. And in LA, I can literally go, especially in COVID days, I can go from the car to the house, to the car, to the house, to the grocery store, to the car, to the house, and it's really easy to not see people and not connect with people. If you have a job, it's like the car to the job, to the house, to the car, to the house, and I think to me, that's the thing that can be most debilitating about LA is just the level of isolation. So I sort of feel like groups, I'm such a group person, whether it's like, go to your church or go to a meditation group or go to, join a community organization or have a writing group, or I just feel like the sort of forced interactions is really for me what keeps me afloat, like, and breaks that isolation and gives me a space to take all the stuff that's happening and be like, here's this, blah, blah, blah. That's essential out here, I think.
Yeah, that's great advice. And now with the pandemic, I still see people exercising outside in groups. So there is some social distancing group activities that you can get involved in.
Yes. And even groups on Zoom, I think are, can be really good. Yoga class on Zoom, or, a men's group or a women's group on Zoom, or a discussion group. There are all kinds of things that are happening. It's really about like scheduling those and being with people like over and over again.
Yeah, that's great advice. Tell me a little bit about your the coaching that you do, because I know you do that with groups, small groups, and you've also done it one-on-one. How did you come to that? And what is the key goal, or what kind of people do you work with? What have you seen the trajectory of the people that you've worked with?
The coaching thing came out of, I think, the same space of, my general origin story. My parents are teachers. When I first got into the entertainment industry, as an actor and then as a writer, I was so smacked in the face with what I didn't know. How does this work? Like, not only like, how do I do the networking and the social space? Like, for a while, for years and years, it was, how do I get an agent? How do I get an agent? How do I get an agent? Or how do I get in to see a showrunner, or how do I get a meeting at such and such? Or there just were and are a million questions that I don't know, that I think have answers, but I think I kept running into people who wouldn't give me answers. Either they were like, I don't know, or I figured it out, or there's no answer, or just let it go, or whatever. Or they'd say, you must do blah, 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 and I'd feel really overwhelmed with all the must do's, and felt like, oh, I'm disappointing this mentor who said I must do, and I can't do that, So I just got all turned around and around in terms of what am I supposed to do, and how does this work? And one day, a friend of mine introduced me to this other book called Coaching the Artists Within, which is by a guy named Eric Maisel, who's like really brilliant and was a PhD and kind of created the idea of creativity coaching. And his book is basically about coaching yourself and his own creativity coaching practice and his own artistic practice. And I love this book so much. And at the back of it, it's got his email address, or at least in the editions previously. It was like, you want to be coached, reach out to me here. You want to learn to coach, reach out to me here, and I'll, you can. So I ended up signing up for becoming a student at something called the Creativity Coaching Association. And I got certified as a coach a handful of years ago. Actually, I finished my requirements while I was at Corporate Affairs. And what I realized is it gave me and it gives me the opportunity to share the wealth. Like, there's all this stuff that I know, that I discovered, that I found, that I stumbled into, that somebody told me. And my goal really is particularly to make it a little bit easier for women, people of color, queer people to tell their stories. Because I think the world runs on stories. You know, we've been doing it for hundreds of thousands of years, and it's kind of like, that's really what we love. And so how can I inspire other people to learn to tell stories on a level where we can change kind of like some of the damaging mythology that we sort of walk around with in this country and in the world? I'm really interested in that. So yeah, so it started that way, and I'm able to do it when I'm not on a show or when things are slower for me, but it's really a blast. And it not only gives me a chance to give back, but it also, I think in a lot of ways, reminds me of what I know. Like I'll be talking to somebody about something, and I'll be like, oh yeah, that's right. I remember that. That's true.
Right. Sort of like that idea of you can't keep it if you don't give it away. It's like you get to remind yourself.
Exactly.
So what are you working on now?
Goodness. I'm super happy to be writing for STARGIRL, the CW show. It's really, really fun. And my boss is amazing, Jeff Johns. And we're working on season 2 of that. It's in production right now in Atlanta. I just turned in my second episode of the season a week ago or something like that. And my first episode of the season, the production draft, was just issued to the production crew, so I'm excited about that. I've also been working on a couple of different things. There are a bunch of short plays of mine that have been done around the country. There's a piece that I've been working on called Black Lives, Blue Lives, where it's these 2 monologues, and it's about one policeman and one black guy talking to a group of police recruits about their own perspective on the world, and that's been super fun. Theater Project in New Jersey is doing that, and by Zoom to all these, super interesting discussions. It's super fun. So I'm working on that, and I'm working on a screenplay about this a Native American young female basketball player who passed away years ago, co-writing that with a friend. Got a pilot, all sorts of things I'm writing.
Yeah, and you're going to be publishing an anthology of your
yes,
right?
That's right. I'm working on publishing an anthology of my work, and really excited about it.
Yeah, I'm excited to see your publishing arm of your business.
Yes, thank you.